Hey, before we start tonight's story, can I ask you something? How's the weather where you are right now? Is it cold? A little warm? Maybe windy? Or maybe you're listening from somewhere quiet and still. Here, where I'm recording, there's a soft little rain tapping on the window. Nothing dramatic, just that gentle, steady sound the night makes when it wants you to fall asleep. A kind of, shh, it's okay, slow down now kind of rain. Every few seconds, you can hear it settle, a soft tick, 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 like a sleepy metronome. It's honestly perfect weather for a story. So wherever you are, whether your night is noisy or peaceful, warm or chilly, go ahead and settle in. Adjust your pillow, let your shoulders drop, and just breathe normally for a moment. We're not going anywhere fast tonight. We're just going to drift. Because tonight's story is about Ethereum, but not the Ethereum you see in headlines or charts or debates. Not the loud, complicated one. The early one. The awkward, still growing, quietly experimental Ethereum. The version that lived on laptops and message boards and inside the heads of a few sleep-deprived dreamers. You know, when people talk about Ethereum today, they make it sound like it arrived fully formed, like some grand machine dropped from the sky. But the truth is much softer. Ethereum began with tiny ideas, strange proposals, late-night messages, blurry screenshots, and jokes that somehow became real features. So tonight, with the rain outside keeping us company, I thought we'd revisit those early, gentle beginnings. Not the technical stuff, don't worry about that. Just the human parts, the funny parts, the slightly embarrassing parts, the wow, I can't believe this was actually discussed parts. If your eyes feel a little heavy while listening, that's perfect. You don't need to stay awake for everything. Think of this as a friend telling you some soft, strange stories while the rain helps you drift off. We'll start with the early EIPs, some proposals so odd and so naive that they almost feel like diary entries. Then we'll wander into the world of meme lore and talk about how a single pajama photo somehow turned into a piece of Ethereum mythology. After that, we'll slow down even more and spend a little time with Gavin Wood. Not in a technical way, but in a gentle, almost musical way, because he has that atmosphere about him. And finally, we'll end with the DAO. Not as a disaster, but as a moment when a young ecosystem realized how fragile it really was and somehow became stronger through that softness. These aren't big, dramatic stories. They're small, quiet ones. Perfect for nights like this. Nights when the weather makes you want to curl up and listen to something calm. So, if you're still adjusting, go ahead. If you need a blanket, grab one. If you want to dim the lights, do it. There's no rush at all. Just the sound of rain, just a soft voice, and a handful of early blockchain stories drifting gently through the room. If you've ever watched a child try to build something, a tower of blocks, a cardboard contraption, the drawing only they understand, You've already seen what the earliest Ethereum proposals felt like. They weren't polished or confident or even practical most of the time. They were soft, awkward, full of possibility, like someone whispering an idea before they're sure they should say it out loud. Back then, you could read every proposal in a single sitting. Not because they were short, but because there simply weren't many of them. The whole ecosystem fit into a few GitHub threads and a handful of chat rooms where people forgot to mute their microphones and nobody minded. It felt like a tiny attic where people were quietly building a future they didn't yet understand. It's funny. Today the word EIP sounds official, almost ceremonial. But in the early days, most of them read like little doodles someone scribbled in the margins of a notebook. Half-formed ideas, dreams typed at 3 a.m., proposals written with one eye open, the other already drifting into sleep. There was one proposal I always think about, a gigantic list of every idea that crossed the author's mind. Privacy tools, token structures, rainbow-colored contracts nobody ever defined, a voting system that required almost magical intuition to use, all poured into one single document. You could feel the author reaching in 10 directions at once, hoping that somewhere in that chaos was the beginning of something meaningful. And nothing really came of it. But that was the beauty, the boldness of dreaming before there were rules. Then there was the proposal that tried to solve a problem nobody actually had. It introduced nested state machines, strange cryptographic tricks, and explanations that were basically the author telling themselves, "I think this makes sense. Maybe." Reading it today feels like discovering a love letter someone wrote to an idea they couldn't quite grasp. But the community back then was small, curious, gentle. People didn't dismiss it. They asked questions. Kind ones. Ones that sounded like friends trying to help each other understand something complicated, but not urgent. You could tell they were all exploring something new together, softly bumping into the unknown. My favorite reply from that era was, "Could you explain this again, but imagine I'm 5 years old?" And the author, in beautiful honesty, simply wrote back, "I'm not sure I understand it anymore." They laughed, moved on, and nobody felt embarrassed. The proposal didn't matter. The warmth of that tiny human moment did. But sometimes, a small, silly idea blossoms into something unexpectedly important. There was a proposal originally written almost as a joke, meant to be nothing more than a light-hearted thought. But someone noticed something quietly brilliant in it. And then someone else noticed it too. Soon enough, this tiny, half-joking suggestion grew into a real improvement. A modest adjustment, still living inside Ethereum today. It's strange how often life works like that. The grand ideas fall flat, and the small ones, the ones whispered almost shyly, become the ones that last. And then there were the poetic proposals. Oh, those were special. You could immediately tell the author wasn't a typical developer. Their writing drifted like a soft breeze, talking about gardens of computation, ecosystems of logic, organic patterns in decentralized networks. It was beautiful, utterly impractical, but beautiful. People loved it not because they understood it, but because it felt like a poem hiding inside a technical forum. One comment said, "This belongs in a museum, not the protocol." And in a way it did. It never became part of Ethereum, but it reminded the early builders that technology could have a soul, that networks weren't just code, but collections of dreams shaped by human hands. When you look back at these early proposals, there's no clear storyline, no structured evolution, no grand order, just a scattered constellation of tiny ideas, some brilliant, some strange, some sleep-deprived, all glowing quietly in the dark. And even if most of them led nowhere, they captured a feeling, the gentle experimental innocence of a network still learning how to walk. Ethereum today feels big, organized, mature. But its childhood was soft, curious, full of half-finished thoughts floating like little paper boats across a pond. Some sank immediately, some drifted quietly. A few reached the other side. But each one carried a little hope. So, if you're still awake, just picture that pond for a moment. Quiet water, moonlit edges, tiny boats carrying tiny dreams, all drifting slowly, softly, toward whatever comes next. We'll leave them there for now, and whenever you're ready, we'll wander into the next story together.
You know, memes are strange things. They never ask for permission before they appear. They just happen, quietly, accidentally, like a spark that catches on something dry. And in the world of Ethereum, almost no story captures that feeling better than the legend of the pajama photograph. You've probably seen it somewhere, the image of Vitalik standing slightly stiff, eyes a little uncertain, wearing pajamas that look less like sleepwear and more like something a shy wizard's apprentice might wear on laundry day. It's one of those things that once you've seen it, it never truly leaves your mind. But what's funny is that the story behind it is softer, lighter, and far more human than the internet ever bothered to explain. In those early days, before Ethereum became a word people threw around in conference halls and financial articles, Vitalik was still just Vitalik, a tall, quiet kid who typed faster than he spoke and who always seemed slightly surprised that the world took his ideas so seriously. And like a lot of people who live in their heads more than in the mirror, he didn't think too much about how he looked, especially not in casual moments. The pajama photo wasn't a publicity shot. It wasn't meant for a presentation or an event or a documentary. It was just a moment. A tiny, awkward, charming moment someone captured without thinking the world would ever see it. And somehow, the world did. The story goes that Vitalik showed up to a small gathering, nothing official really, just a handful of people brainstorming, eating snacks, discussing weird ideas about decentralized logic and tokenized everything. Everyone was dressed casually. Sweatpants, hoodies, worn-out t-shirts. It was that kind of place. a room where ideas mattered more than appearances, and Vitalik showed up in pajamas. Not in a funny way, not as a joke, and not because he wanted attention. It was simply what he felt comfortable in. It matched his rhythm, and in a strange way, it matched Ethereum's too. Someone snapped a picture. Just one, probably without thinking twice. Just, here we are, hanging out and being creators kind of moment. The kind of picture you scroll past on your phone a week later and think, oh, that was a nice day. And for a while, that's all it was. A quiet memory, sitting in someone's camera roll. But then one day, the photo escaped into the wild. Nobody knows exactly how. Maybe it was shared in a chat, maybe posted in a thread, maybe shown innocently to someone who didn't realize how quickly things travel on the internet. But the effect was immediate. People loved it. Not in a cruel way, not in a let's make fun of this guy way, more in a tender, affectionate way, like watching a baby deer try to understand how legs work. In that one image, people saw something rare, a brilliant mind wrapped in a soft, unpolished moment of complete vulnerability. A kid who didn't pretend to be anything other than himself, even as he stood at the edge of creating something enormous. And that honesty, that unfiltered, pajama-wearing sincerity, struck a chord. Soon the image made its way into group chats, forums, meme threads, and eventually social media. But the tone stayed surprisingly gentle. Instead of mocking him, people added captions like, "If this guy can build Ethereum in pajamas, you can do your homework." Or, "Dress for the job you want? Nah, dress for the blockchain you want to build." And slowly, this simple photo became a kind of soft cultural artifact. Proof that Ethereum wasn't born out of polished presentations and corporate branding, but out of messy rooms, mismatched clothing, and brilliant people who forgot they were being watched. And it's strange how much warmth a meme can hold when it's built on affection instead of critique. And I think that's why this one stuck around so long, because it reminded everyone, builders, developers, curious newcomers, that innovation doesn't require grandeur. It only requires sincerity. It requires the kind of unguarded comfort that lets someone show up exactly as they are. And the pajama photo became something else too, an invitation, a symbol of how open Ethereum was in its early years. Anyone could join. Anyone could contribute. You didn't need a suit or a title or a perfect presentation. You just needed curiosity and the willingness to show up, even if you were wearing something you wouldn't wear in public. People began editing the pajama photo into playful posters. Vitalik, first of his name, sleeper of ideas, builder of dreams. Some added little sparkles around him like he was a character from a storybook. Others created gentle animations where he floated like a sleepy wizard through clouds of code. The internet loves to exaggerate, but this time it exaggerated softly, with kindness. As the meme spread, it became a kind of soft cultural anchor, a little reminder of Ethereum's innocence, its childhood, before the conferences, before the drama, before the debates and forks and scale wars. A reminder of a time when the biggest challenge of the day might have been convincing a group of tired developers that some strange idea was worth trying. And the thing is, Vitalik never fought it. He never scolded people for sharing the photo, never complained, never tried to bury it. Because maybe, deep down, he understood what people were really saying. We see the human in you. And we like him. In an ecosystem that can sometimes feel overwhelming or competitive, that softness mattered. You can imagine him seeing the meme one day, blinking a couple of times, tilting his head slightly, and thinking, that's a thing now. and then going back to whatever paper or proposal he was working on, because that was who he was. A dreamer, not a performer. But for everyone else, the pajama photo did something gentle and important. It gave permission. Permission to be imperfect. Permission to show up messy. Permission to create without needing to look like you belong. It told newcomers, you don't have to fit a mold. There is no mold. Ethereum wasn't made by suits or strategists. It was made by thinkers who sometimes forgot to change clothes. And if you sit with that thought for a moment, it's actually kind of comforting. The early days of blockchain weren't clean or organized. They weren't coordinated or strategic. They were full of late nights, weird snacks, tired eyes, and inside jokes. And that photo, just one tiny snapshot of a tall, brilliant kid in pajamas, captured the heart of that era better than any documentary ever could. So the next time you see the meme float by, maybe let it make you smile softly. Not because it's funny, but because it's honest. Because it holds a reminder that creation doesn't come from perfection. It comes from a quiet room, a humble moment, and a mind that's brave enough to share its ideas, even if it shows up wearing pajamas. And if you're drifting a little now, that's all right. These kinds of stories are meant to be gentle. They're meant to loosen the mind, soften the edges of the day, and give you permission to rest. Just like that photo gave a whole community permission to breathe. When you're ready, we can wander into the next story. But there's no rush. Not tonight.
Some people enter a room with noise. Their energy rushes in first, filling every corner before they even open their mouths. And then there are people like Gavin Wood. People who enter so quietly that you don't even notice they're there at first. It's only after a few minutes that you realize something in the room has shifted. The air feels calmer, the conversations soften. And when he finally speaks, you understand why. His presence isn't loud, but it's steady, like the hum of a machine in the next room. Constant, thoughtful, quietly reassuring. When you think about the early days of Ethereum, it's easy to picture Vitalik as the spark, the bright, wandering flame. But Gavin? Gavin was the steady candle in the corner. Flames dance, candles hold, and Ethereum needed both. Gavin wasn't the type to chase attention. While others debated ideas loudly, bouncing thoughts back and forth like ping-pong balls, Gavin would sit back with this almost meditative stillness, letting the noise settle before speaking. And when he finally did, it felt like someone smoothing wrinkles out of a sheet. Calm, precise, unhurried. He spoke like a mathematician, but thought like an artist. Not the kind who paints in bright colors, but the kind who draws quietly with pencil. Soft lines, subtle shading, careful structure. His contributions weren't always the kind that made headlines, but they were the kind that held the whole thing together. Solidity, the language he designed, wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to work. And it did. But what made Gavin so fascinating wasn't just his intellect. It was the way he carried it. Some people talk about their achievements. Gavin let his work talk for him. He never seemed to push himself forward. Instead, he drifted through conversations like a calm river flowing through a noisy town, smoothing the rough edges without needing anyone to notice.
It's rare to meet a person whose intelligence feels soft instead of sharp, but Gavin was one of those rare people. There's an old photo of him, maybe you've seen it, sitting at a table during one of those chaotic early meetups. People around him are waving their hands, laughing, interrupting each other, half arguing, half brainstorming. And there he is, leaning back slightly, arms folded loosely, listening with this expression that's part curiosity, part patience, part quiet amusement. His eyes look like someone who sees a little more than what people are saying. Someone already thinking 3 steps ahead, but without the need to show it. He wasn't the loud visionary, and he wasn't the performer. He was the architect. The one who looks at a house not for its color or its furniture, but for its beams, its angles, its load-bearing walls. Vitalik dreamed the city. Gavin figured out how to build the first street light, one line of code at a time. But maybe what people misunderstood about Gavin was that silence doesn't mean distance. He wasn't absent, just inward. He thought in long sentences. He spoke in complete paragraphs. And when he explained something, there was this softness behind every word, as if he were trying to place each idea gently into your hands, careful not to let it spill. He had that calm professor aura, the kind who writes complex formulas on a chalkboard and then turns around with a smile, asking, "Does this make sense?" even though he knows it probably doesn't yet. One of my favorite descriptions of Gavin came from someone who said he looks like a wizard who accidentally ended up in a tech meeting. And honestly, that feels right. There was something almost otherworldly about him, not in a grand, mystical way, but in the way very old libraries feel magical, quiet, dusty, safe. He had this habit of pausing before answering a question, not long enough to make it awkward, just long enough to make you feel he was truly thinking about what you said. In a field where people often respond too fast, trying to sound smart, that pause felt almost luxurious, like someone opening a small door inside their mind, inviting light to spill into the hallway. And when he disagreed with someone, he did it without heat. No sparks, no sharp edges, just a gentle, "I'm not sure that's quite right," followed by a careful explanation that made you wonder how you hadn't seen it his way before. It wasn't persuasion, it was guidance, the kind that doesn't push you, but invites you to walk beside it. Of course, the early days weren't always peaceful. Building Ethereum wasn't like assembling furniture with clear instructions. It was like trying to build a spaceship while the parts were still being invented. People argued. People grew tired. People misunderstood each other. And Gavin, quiet as he was, wasn't immune to frustration. He cared deeply, sometimes too deeply. And when the ecosystem began to stretch in directions he wasn't comfortable with, you could feel a shift in him. Not anger, not resentment, just distance. A soft stepping back. Like someone placing a bookmark between pages and letting the book rest for a while. But before any of that, before the forks and the choices and the new paths, there was simply Gavin, the quiet mind behind so many of the tools people take for granted today. And it's gentle to remember that he didn't set out to become a figure in history.
He set out to solve a problem, to make something elegant, to design something that felt clean and balanced and thoughtfully engineered. He once said that software should feel like music, structured, emotional, expressive, but also mathematically sound. And if you look closely at the things he built, you can see that philosophy everywhere. Solidity has rhythm. The early Ethereum clients have cadence. Even his writing has a kind of musical phrasing, like someone humming softly while assembling ideas piece by piece. You can almost imagine him late at night, sitting beside a dim lamp while everyone else slept. Not rushing, not chasing deadlines, just following the thread of an idea wherever it wanted to go. There's something tender about that image. A lone creator shaping part of a future network without any certainty that people would ever use it. And yet, they did. Millions did. People often associate brilliance with bright energy, but sometimes brilliance is quiet. Sometimes it stands at the back of the room. Sometimes it speaks softly and lets the code do the talking. Sometimes it wears a slightly rumpled shirt, has tired eyes, and leans over a laptop with the calm patience of someone tuning a piano. That was Gavin. And maybe that's why, even now, people talk about him with a kind of softness. Not with the reverence reserved for legends, but with the warmth reserved for a teacher you once had. One who changed the way you thought without ever raising their voice. So, as you lie there listening, imagine him for a moment, not the public figure, not the co-founder, not the man attached to 100 headlines, but the quiet presence in those early rooms, the one who sat with folded arms, listening more than speaking, offering clarity where there was confusion, offering structure where there was chaos, offering calm where there was noise. Ethereum was built by many hands, some loud, some bright, some bold, but in its softest moments, in the subtle lines of its architecture, in the careful logic of its early design.
Some events in history usually get told with sharp lines and dramatic colors. The DAO story is often one of them. People talk about it like an earthquake, a collapse, a loud, shattering moment that left scratches across the early blockchain. But tonight, we don't need that version. Instead, let's slow everything down and talk about it the way it might have felt from inside. Quietly, softly, like a fragile moment that swept through a young community, still learning how to walk. In the early days, the DAO felt almost like a dream. Not the kind of dream that comes from sleep, but the kind that appears when people believe in something together. At its core, it was simple. Strangers from all over the world pooling their ideas and resources into one shared experiment, trying to see if a new kind of organization could exist, one without bosses, without buildings, without borders. It wasn't greed, not at first. It was curiosity. It was optimism. It was that tender, hopeful energy that comes from thinking, maybe we can build something different. And people joined, quietly at first, then quickly, then suddenly with a rush that nobody fully expected. You could almost imagine those early contributors sitting in small apartments, coffee shops, dorm rooms, offices after hours, leaning close to their screens as if whispering to a friend, clicking one small button that said, "Yes, I'm part of this too." Not because they understood everything, nobody did, but because the idea felt gentle and exciting in the same breath. For a moment, the experiment seemed almost magical, a collective heartbeat forming from thousands of people who would never meet, a shared story, a shared hope, something new. And then something happened. Not a bang, not a scream, just a subtle shift. A line of code behaving differently than intended. A weakness revealing itself not through malice, but through mathematics. And slowly, quietly, value began to move in ways it wasn't meant to. Not stolen in the dramatic sense people imagine, but drifting out through a flaw, like sand slipping through a crack in a glass bottle. People noticed, at first with confusion, then with concern, but even in those early messages there was softness. Not panic, not blame, just questions. Is this expected? Does anyone understand what we're seeing? Could this be a bug? The community, still small, still tender, gathered in chats and forums the same way you might gather around a flickering candle, trying to understand what was happening without letting fear blow the flame out.
As the picture became clearer, the tone shifted, not to chaos, but to something more serious, something quieter, heavier, like a room holding its breath. There were no villains in that moment, no heroes either, just people, some exhausted, some worried, some staring at lines of code that suddenly felt far more fragile than they had the day before. And yet through all the uncertainty, one thing stayed constant, a sense of togetherness. The community didn't break apart, they leaned in. I like to imagine that night as a long, dimly lit hallway where everyone walked slowly, carefully, trying not to make the wrong sound. People weren't shouting, they were whispering. Developers didn't rush. They breathed, they examined, they tried to understand line by line, hour by hour, what path forward still remained open. And here's the part most people overlook. Even at the peak of the crisis, there was kindness. People asked each other how they were holding up. They apologized for not having answers yet. They offered help, even if they didn't know how to give it. This wasn't a frenzy. It was a moment of shared vulnerability, a realization that even brilliant ideas can stumble. Even strong buildings can sway. Even dreams can tremble a little before they find their footing again. Eventually, the community reached a point where choice had to be made. Not a perfect choice, not a painless one, just the best one available with the knowledge they had. And the conversation around that choice wasn't neat or polished. It was emotional, tired, human. People cared deeply, and caring makes decisions heavier, not lighter. The fork, whether someone agreed with it or not, wasn't born from anger. It was born from a desire to protect something that still felt young and precious. It was a decision made by people who'd spent countless hours building something fragile and didn't want to watch it collapse before it ever had a chance to become real. Some stayed one way, some went the other, but both paths were walked with intention, not spite. Both sides believed they were protecting the soul of the network, and in a way, both were right.
Ethereum is wide enough to hold many truths, many philosophies, many ways of caring. When you look back now, with years of distance, the story often gets told with drama. But inside the moment, it felt more like a tremor than an explosion. A trembling of the ground beneath a community that cared too much to walk away. And after the shaking settled, something remarkable happened. The network kept going. People kept building. The dream didn't end. It simply split into two branches, each holding a different part of the original intention. And maybe that's the most comforting part of all. The idea that even when something breaks, it doesn't always collapse. Sometimes it becomes two things instead of one. Sometimes it grows in directions nobody expected. Sometimes it survives because people refuse to give up on it. So when you hear the DAO story told as a disaster, remember the softer version too. The version where people stayed up through the night, talking gently, breathing slowly, and trying their best to hold something fragile together. Remember that behind every line of code were human beings who cared deeply about what they were building. And maybe most importantly, remember that mistakes don't always end a story. Sometimes they just change its shape. If your eyes feel heavy, that's all right. This story is not meant to excite you. It's meant to settle softly into the quiet spaces of your mind, reminding you that even in uncertainty, there can be calm. Even in confusion, there can be kindness. Even in a moment that feels like a crack, there can be light slipping through. Whenever you're ready, we can move on. There's one more part, a gentle ending to soften the night, but there's no hurry. Rest here as long as you need.
Some nights, the stories we tell feel like stepping stones across a shallow river. Small, soft, spaced just far enough apart that you have to slow down and place your foot gently on each one. Tonight was one of those nights. Nothing too loud, nothing too sharp. Just small pieces of Ethereum's early history laid out softly beneath the sound of a quiet rain. We talked about strange old proposals, those awkward little ideas that once floated through the early community like paper boats on a pond. We wandered through the gentle absurdity of a pajama photograph that somehow became a symbol of authenticity. We spent time with Gavin Wood, feeling the calm weight of his quiet brilliance. And we drifted carefully through the story of the DAO, not as a disaster, but as a moment of fragile togetherness, one that shaped the network without breaking its spirit. And maybe as you listened, you felt something subtle shift inside you. Not a big change, but just a quiet exhale you didn't realize you were holding. These stories, soft, human, a little imperfect, have a way of doing that. They remind us that even the technologies that feel huge and complicated were once built by people who were tired, curious, uncertain, hopeful. People who argued gently, people who laughed, people who stayed up too late, people who tried their best. It's easy to forget that when we talk about blockchains or protocols or forks. We wrap everything in big words and abstract ideas. But underneath it all, there were hands on keyboards. There were eyes squinting at screens. There were friendships forming and breaking and reshaping. There were moments of doubt, moments of joy, moments of quiet clarity at 3 in the morning. And I think that's why these stories make such good company at night. Because they remind us that even the biggest systems in the world began with small, fragile moments. Even the strongest networks once trembled. Even the most confident builders once paused and wondered if they were doing any of this right. So as we reach the end of tonight's chapter, I hope you let that softness settle a little deeper. Let your breath fall into an easy rhythm. Let your body melt into whatever surface is holding you. Let the room grow a little dimmer in your mind. And if you're still awake, just barely, just on the edge, that's perfectly fine. You don't need to stay with me much longer. The stories have done what they needed to do. They've kept you company. They've wrapped your thoughts in something warm and slow. They've dimmed the noise of the day beneath the quiet hum of memory. All you have to do now is rest. If you've already drifted off, then I'm glad. If you're still listening, then I'm here with you for just a moment more. And when you finally let go, when you finally slip into sleep, the stories will be waiting right here, ready to carry you again some other night. Good night. Sleep well, and may your dreams be gentle.